WNYC Studios is supported by Odoo. When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show. I'm producer Amina Serna, filling in for Brian today. As demand for artificial intelligence grows, so do proposals for new data centers. These are facilities where computers power AI, storing, processing, and sending out information. But data centers tend to be massive in both size and energy consumption. And who pays for the additional capacity? In her State of the State address, Governor Kathy Hochul announced plans to shift more energy costs onto tech companies themselves.
Now, data centers are vital for an innovative future, but they guzzle up tremendous amounts of energy and leave ratepayers footing the bill. So if they want to build in New York, they have to pay their fair share for the power they use.
Here to walk us through that idea is Rosemary Misdary, science reporter for WNYC and Gothamist. Hi, Rosemary.
Hi, Amina.
Let's start simple. What exactly are data centers? How do they power tools like artificial intelligence?
A data center is basically a large warehouse full of thousands of servers. They're the physical computers that store, process, and transmit digital information. When you stream a video, when you send an email, when you use a search engine or run an AI chatbot, your request travels to a data center somewhere, gets processed, and the result comes back to you. They're the physical backbone of the internet and cloud computing. Companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft operate massive ones globally, but so do banks, hospitals, universities, and governments.
That is the clearest and most concise description I've ever heard. Thank you. So how many data centers are there in the state, and where are they located?
Statewide, there's more than 130 data centers, and about half of them are located in the New York City metro area.
And can you tell us why it's a widely held belief that data centers could increase costs for energy consumers?
Well, a modern AI data center in particular it uses an enormous amount of continuous electricity. So unlike a regular industry like a factory that would power down at the end of the night, it's running 24/7. And because it's running 24/7, it also needs to be cooled. So there's a lot of electricity and a lot of water consumption that goes into cooling these thousands of computers that are running 24/7. But it also costs a lot of money on ratepayers because under the existing utility rate structures, when a large new customer like a data center connects to the grid, it triggers the need for infrastructure upgrades. So we're talking about new substations, transmission lines, distribution system improvements. And those costs, which are in the billions, get spread out across all ratepayers in the form of higher utility bills.
Some tech companies, though, they dispute that increased costs for energy is driven down to the customer. What is their argument?
I think that, their feeling is that these technologies are needed. They are needed for innovation, and all customers use these technologies. As I said before, whether they're streaming, they're banking, whatever it is they're using. The idea that it's not getting passed to the ratepayers is erroneous. It is getting passed down to the ratepayers.
Listeners, we want to hear your thoughts. Are you skeptical of data centers, or do you support their construction? What do you think of the governor's plan to protect ratepayers from increasing energy demands? maybe something about data centers still has you confused. You can reach us at 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. And as always, you can text that number as well. Rosemary, we just mentioned that data centers take a lot of energy. Give us some context around that. How does their energy consumption compared to, say, a private residence or maybe even another industrial site?
It's hard to compare to a single household, but let's just take a large data center a single one that Amazon or Google or Microsoft might be operating. They usually use over 100 megawatts of power. And just to give you an idea of how much power that is, that's enough electricity to power about 80,000 households. Wow.
A listener writes, if data centers are required to foot the bill for their energy needs, actually, let's walk through the governor's plan first. I think that's a better idea. So walk us through the plan to place responsibility for the cost of data centers more squarely on tech companies' shoulders. Does the governor have a specific proposal?
No, not at this point. Right now, where it stands is she has said that she is going to make data centers pay their fair share. We don't know what that actually means, but she has directed the Public Service Commission to investigate the costs associated with connecting data centers to the grid and figuring out how to charge them.
All right, now for this listener question. If data centers are required to foot the bill for their energy needs, won't they pass those costs on to customers? So don't customers end up paying for data centers' energy needs one way or another? Do you have a take on that, Rosemary?
This is, I'm not sure how it would work, but how a data center would pass on the cost to a consumer. Maybe it would be passed on to the business, which would be passed on to the consumer. But it seems, like passing the cost directly on to utility users is much more of a burden.
Do the data centers use the energy from the same electrical grid as the rest of us?
Yes, they do.
And so, is the electrical grid sort of prepared to take on more and more building of data centers? And if not, what would it cost to upgrade the electrical grid to accommodate increased energy needs?
The grid operators, called NISO, they released a report last year, and they estimated that in the next decade, we are going to see an increase in energy demand of 50 to 90%.
Wow.
And that is mostly driven by AI data centers. Right now, in the queue, we have almost 50 data center requests to connect to the queue, and that is about 11 gigawatts of power. And just to give you a rough conversion for what a gigawatt is, 1 gigawatt can power about 1 million households. So we're talking about enough power right now on the queue of requests to power 11 million households. So that is a lot of power. And right now, what we're trying, we already have a problem meeting our own electrical needs because we're also trying to electrify. Mm-hmm. We have electric vehicles, and we're trying to electrify all our transportation. We're trying to electrify our buildings, and that is also going to put added strain on the grid as well.
We have a listener who wants to ask about fossil fuel usage. Here's Sharon in Livingston, New Jersey. Hi, Sharon. You're on WNYC.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I am always listening to complaints about the dollar cost of ratepayers, paying for this energy. But can you please talk about the enormous use of fossil fuels that are being used to power these data centers, both to power the servers themselves and also to cool the data centers? I don't hear people like Kathy Hochul or anybody else for that matter talking about the enormous impact this has in terms of climate change, fossil fuels, and also to what extent are any of these data centers being powered by renewables like solar? And the tech companies like Google, Amazon, are they making any kind of meaningful commitments to using renewable energy to power their data centers? Thank you.
Sharon, thank you so much for your call. Rosemary?
In the state of New York, I am not aware of any data centers that are powered by renewable energy. If there are, it's very rare. And, it's interesting to note when you talk about the environmental impacts, these data centers are subject to both the state and the city climate laws. They must reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And let's face it, so when we talk about climate emissions, the downstate grid, which powers the New York City metro area, is powered by about 90% fossil fuel sources. Now, every time you use electricity, you're creating climate emissions. So these data centers, because of the enormous amount of energy they use, they are creating climate emissions. And I'll just give you a quick example of one. There's Greenwich Generation. It's technically a data center. It mines Bitcoin. It's not an AI data center. And it owns its own fossil fuel power plant. It's just over 100 megawatts, and it's in the Finger Lakes. Mm-hmm. And annually, it produces about 800,000 tons of carbon. Okay, that's a lot. And that's just one data center with 20,000 computers going 24/7 mining Bitcoin. That's how much pollution it's creating. And also, in order to cool, we're talking about millions of gallons of water that is used to cool these facilities. So it's definitely a burden on the environment, on air pollution, on our natural resources.
You were talking about 800,000 tons of carbon pollution. What is that equal to? What is that? Is there any comparable? How many cars is that? Or
I don't know how many cars offhand that is, but if you think about 800,000 tons is a lot. I don't have an equivalent for how much that weighs, but that's more.
Or I think this is is this from your reporting? The facility uses energy that produces 800,000 tons of carbon pollution, roughly equivalent to 170,000 cars. So the same amount of pollution. Sorry. I see my question there. Do you have a sense of how New Yorkers are feeling about Hochul's plan? Does it ease any concern of opponents of data centers and what they're feeling?
There is a growing, strong opposition to data centers. More than 100 environmental groups and advocacy groups are strongly opposed to the state hosting any data centers. And so that's the growing, strong sentiment. While a lot of other people think that, if they build their own clean energy, renewable energy, and power their own facilities, then they're not drawing from the grid and they're not creating pollution. So let them go do that. But most people do not want these data centers drawing from the grid.
We have a council member calling in, Council Member Julie Wan from Astoria. Hi, Council Member. You're on WNYC.
Yes. Thank you for having me. I want to point out that AI data, from my perspective, as someone who comes from 10 years of tech experience, AI data centers are the ones raising the cost of public utility bills. That is a false narrative that I want to push back on. Crumbling American infrastructure hasn't been updated in decades, and that's the core reason why these utility bills are really going up. And it just so happens that right now, the newest technology, like AI, requires the latest infrastructure, which we do not have. So we're not going to be able to compete with other countries when it comes to technology and innovation. And I think it's important for us to think of it like a road. If someone wants to drive a semi-truck on a road to deliver supplies for food, but the road is it's a one-lane road that has not been updated to scale to the size of trucks and the volume of trucks that we need, that means the semi-truck won't be able to go, and the construction companies will be forced to expand to make sure that we can respond to the need. So it's the same thing that's happening with the utility companies, and they should not just be blaming technology for it, but we need to be honest and say we haven't updated our utilities in decades.
Councilmember, thank you so much for your call. Rosemary, what are you thinking?
She does have a point about the aging infrastructure. Our infrastructure, even without having to add AI data centers, needs upgrades from the distribution lines that come to the individual sites all the way up to added power sources and generation. But the AI data centers are another giant level of demand. So they are driving. So it's one thing to say, like, okay, we already need to upgrade our infrastructure to meet demand, but this is a huge level of demand that's going to require an enormous amount of upgrades to meet. So when you talk about the diesel truck, the freight trucks, okay, as an analogy, if all people are doing on the highway is driving their car, okay, then you design for people going to and fro. But let's say there's all of a sudden there's a boom in shipping, and now the roads need to be tripled in size in order to meet the need of all of this truck shipping. Now, should ratepayers have to pay now for their roads to be enlarged for a business, for all these businesses, tripled or quadrupled in size? So there is the analogy is correct, but also we have to consider the fact that this is an enormous amount of electricity. This isn't just like 10%, 20%. We're talking a huge amount. And as NISO said in their report, we're talking 50 to 90% in increased energy demands over the next decade. And their report points out AI data centers as the main driver for this.
So give us a little bit of the pushback. I mean, how are tech companies feeling about Hochul's plan?
I mean, tech companies recognize that, they feel these data centers are necessary for business. They have to. And they need the energy. And I've spoken to a few people who work in the tech industry, and they say they just want the power. And there is no... I think they're less concerned about the climate and environmental impacts, as they want to find a way to be able to get the power to for their systems and for their data centers, but there is no clear idea of what her plan will look like. So it's too early to talk about like opinions on what that's going to look like.
Let's go to a call. Cal in Stamford, Connecticut. You're on WNYC. Hi, Cal.
Hi. Yeah, I'm thinking back in time, and I seem to remember there were different rate structures. If you had your home, you paid one rate structure. If you had a factory, you paid another rate structure. Why isn't there just a separate rate structure for data centers?
Cal, thank you so much for your call. Rosemary?
Oh, that is such a good question. That's something we should ask the public. We should ask Hochul and the Public Service Commission, because you know what? I'm glad you brought this up, because commercial rates are far cheaper than residential rates. All of us living in our homes, we're paying more. Now, I can't give you like exact numbers of how much, but I have seen percentages thrown around. Like we're paying around 25% or more for our electricity than like a commercial ratepayer. Now, that's not an exact one, but it's some of the percentages I've seen in some reports. But yes, we are paying significantly more for power.
A listener texts, are there proposals to force the data centers to provide their own power sources? I see that some other states have allowed data centers to build microgrids, which work like their own electrical grids to power an individual facility or data center. Is that something New York has explored?
The governor has hinted at this when she said, pay your fair share or build your own clean energy. And I don't think, it doesn't sound like she's going to force them to build their own energy sources. It seems like either you pay more money or you pay and build your own clean energy source, which might be the reality if the grid can't handle all of the requests for data centers.
Governor Hochul floated this plan during her State of the State address in January. So where does the initiative stand today?
As far as I know, it stands as this. She has directed the Public Service Commission to begin reviewing the costs associated with connecting data centers to the grid, to figure out how much to charge them and how to reduce the burden on ratepayers. And that's where it stands right now. Now, there's other actions going on for data centers. There's a moratorium. There's a bill for a moratorium that was introduced last month. And in this bill, there would be it's around 3 years of a pause on permitting new large-scale data centers. And during this pause, the state would have to do a rigorous investigation of the environmental impacts and also direct the Public Service Commission to look at the costs associated for ratepayers. And in order to be able to proceed with permitting data centers.
Let's go to a caller. Gwen in East Harlem. Hi, you're on WNYC.
Hi, I didn't expect to get on. I just wanted to say that a couple of years ago, I noticed that my electricity absolutely went through the roof. And then I started to talk to people at my favorite restaurant, and the tone of the people got pitchfork high. People were furious because I am paying more than double what I used to pay. And I'm not even using my electricity half of the time. And so all of this, I took to Con Edison and tried to get to the bottom of it. And they never had an answer for me, except for that now you have to pay $50 a month just to have your electricity hooked up. Just to have that hooked up, it costs you $50. But I really take issue with these jackasses calling up and talking about what a great thing this is to have us, the taxpayers, pay for yet another burden that the rich is laying at our feet. And as far as Kathy Hochul is concerned, I am very, very upset that she wants to open up. I don't care if there's smaller nuclear power plants. They should not be here. They did not work. Until you can figure out where you're going to put that radioactive material, which is a half-life of 300,000 years, we still have a huge problem. And I also take issue with her dumping radioactive material in the beautiful Hudson River. I mean, I think Americans really need to get a grip. What on earth, how many people do you really know that know anything about Bitcoin? Probably you can count them on your hands. Not too many people. And it just seems to me that the masses are being asked to lay out more money and prop these people up that have nothing to do in their spare time except for be pedophiles and to violate American citizens, middle class most of the time. And we keep being asked to pay for it. So my idea is what they're doing in Minnesota. How about a good old general rent strike on everything? Because I feel like so many Americans, we can't keep paying for these rich fat cats that give back nothing, that continue to take away our rights, and they continue to assault us.
Gwen, let me get a response for you here from our reporter, Rosemary. What are you thinking as you're hearing Gwen talk?
You know
what? Hearing
what?
That passion?
You're right. Okay, the reason, a large part of why your utility bill is going up is you are paying for infrastructure upgrades. Okay, and that's both residential and commercial upgrades. That is what you are paying for. Now, some of it is also the guaranteed rate of return for Con Ed's investments and National Grid's investments. So you are paying. That's a large part of the burden. So, but how much of the now I looked at I was looking at not New York State but nationwide. They did a study, and it showed that people who lived within 50 miles of a data center had larger, higher utility bills. And so, yes, there is a correlation between that. And as they grow, it's going to be more noticeable.
We have a couple of callers on energy, where what sources can be used for to power these data centers. Here's Susan in Summit, New Jersey. Hi, Susan. You're on WNYC.
Oh, great. I was just concerned because they said they need a lot of water to do this cool down. And, right now, I always see the commercials about water in New York, but out west and now heading towards the middle west or east or middle of the country, and here we're not so bad, but what makes us think that with all these data centers that our water is going to be reduced? And my one thought is, I don't know who said it, was that water is the new oil. So no one's talking about the water that's going to be used to cool down all the data centers.
Susan,
how much are we going to lose?
Susan, thank you so much for your call. I thought Susan was going to go in a slightly different direction, but Rosemary, are you thinking about this?
No, this is a good point. And Susan, I'm going to note one thing. You live in New Jersey, and New Jersey spends a majority of the year in some form of drought warning. So you have a water problem there, too, to keep in mind. And yes, that is one of the things that we don't talk about when we talk about these data centers coming online, is that we need these millions and millions of gallons of water in order to cool them down. And in a state like New Jersey that spends most of the year in some kind of drought, and New York, which goes through drought as well, this is a serious concern.
Another text. I work in the power industry, and while I agree their consumption pushes up energy prices, they don't in aggregate pay less for power. Data centers pay less for power. They have enormous demand charges. It's not just kilowatt per hour charges. I think I read that correctly. Rosemary, do you have a take on that?
I don't think I can answer that question.
Got it. Well, as we wrap up, how much is the energy use from data centers expected to grow in the future, given the current rate of development?
Well, as I mentioned before, the grid operators predict 50 to 90% in the next decade. We already have about 50 requests sitting on the queue waiting to come online for about 11 gigawatts. And so but the thing is, this is just the beginning.
Right.
This is just the beginning. So it's going to be an explosion of this is just the small beginnings of things, and we're going to see an explosion in the request for power from data centers.
Rosemary Misdary, health and science reporter for WNYC and Gothamist. Rosemary, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Amina.
Since WNYC's first broadcast in 1924, we've been dedicated to creating the kind of content we know the world needs. Since then, New York Public Radio's rigorous journalism has gone on to win a Peabody Award and a DuPont Columbia Award, among others. In addition to this award-winning reporting, your sponsorship also supports inspiring storytelling and extraordinary music that is free and accessible to all. To get in touch and find out more, visit sponsorship.wnyc.org.